We're on the unceded territory of 3 First Nations, and in particular, the Squamish Nation had an Indian reserve here beginning in the 19th century. This is the northeast corner of the reserve. The reason why this is a very special place for the First Nations is we're looking over towards Granville Island, and there used to be a sandbar here, and the sandbar is the location where they would catch fish by putting stakes in the ground and corralling the salmon. This little video is going to illustrate the colonization of the First Nations land. Imagining at one point this area was teeming with sea life as well as wildlife on the land. It's also significant to notice that a community sprouted up here, and about 100 years ago, Chief August Kitsilano drew this map, and you can see on the map are a whole number of place names all clustered around this location at the mouth of False Creek. There would have been many more people living here, except for several waves of smallpox beginning in the 18th century. It's estimated that between 70 and 90% of First Nations died in these smallpox epidemics. The reserve, the Kitsilano Indian Reserve, was established in 1869, and it was increased in size inland to 80 acres, even though when the First Nations were consulted on that, they requested more waterfront, given the waterfront is most valued by the First Nations. 1871 was a significant time because that's when the province of British Columbia was founded, and at that point the British Columbia government had jurisdiction over Crown lands. Up until that point, the Dominion government, which was also responsible for Indian affairs, also had been responsible for Crown lands. And this made it increasingly difficult to negotiate treaties and to establish larger reserves than the postage stamp size reserves that were established all over British Columbia for various First Nations. These are the men that sat in the legislature, and I will admit that I am a settler here, and my family goes back 150 years, and they were business people here, and one of the reasons I do want to make this video is because it's a way for me to pursue a personal journey of reconciliation. We're going to visit 3 other locations of the former Indian Reserve that originally was here in the 19th century. We're now at the northwest corner of the original Kitsilano Indian Reserve. There were about 8 acres that were cleared. There were 12 houses, a longhouse, which was the center of community life. They were cultivating crops, as well as an orchard was planted. One of the first major steps of colonization of the reserve was the arrival of the Canadian Pacific Railway, and they wished to expropriate the entire reserve for a port. And they wanted to put a rail yard here and so forth. Here's the plan for what they had intended. However, they decided to put the port over on Cole Harbour, and the Dominion government wouldn't allow them to expropriate the entire reserve, but did allow them to expropriate a right-of-way which would run through the reserve via a trestle, would head downtown and be connected to the main line. In 1913, the Squamish Nation were removed from the reserve. Title wasn't officially transferred until the late 1940s. The Squamish community that were here were relocated to Howe Sound and the north shore of Burrard Inlet. Beginning in the 19th century, the reserve started to be carved up. The CPR took about 10 acres, which today is the only remaining part of the Squamish Reserve as it has been transferred back to the nation. This clearing here was one part of the right-of-way for the CPR line, which ran over to Kit's Beach, and the right-of-way actually extends as far as the CPR land grant over to Trafalgar Street. Another carving up of the reserve was in 1930, when 8 acres was expropriated by the City of Vancouver for a right-of-way for the footings of the Burrard Street Bridge, which you can see under construction here. This is the southwest corner of the original Kitsilano Indian Reserve at the corner of Chestnut Street and First, close to Burrard Street. This area is where you can see the reserve was carved up. You can see the Seaforth Armories in the background. A future mayor of Vancouver, Tom Campbell, built this apartment building in 1961. He was elected to City Council the following year. This is Parkview Towers. The zoning at the time, the maximum height was 3 stories, but the future mayor appealed to the Board of Variance and the building height was relaxed from 3 to 13 stories. Carving up the former reserve, you can see here a brewery was built here. Originally it was Kitsilano Brewery, and then it was purchased by Molson's. And in the distance you can see the Burrard Street Bridge. National Defense, the military got a significant portion of the lands. Here you can see the Seaforth Armory on Burrard Street. So there you have a short history of the evolution of snook from the 19th century to the establishment of the Kitsilano Indian Reserve in 1869, to the expropriation of a portion of the reserve by the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1895, to the removal of the Squamish Nation in 1913, the building of the Burrard Street Bridge, the establishment of the Seaforth Armory in the 1930s, the construction of a high-rise building and a brewery on a site that used to be Snook and a Kitsilano reserve for the Squamish First Nations. Thank you for the access that we have to the interviews of Chief August Kitsilano, and thank you Vancouver Archives for all the photographs. Have an excellent day. Thank you.